And I remember, of course, like many other Panthers, reading her works and finding when she attacked the prison system, she talked about the perhaps 250,000 or 300,000 people imprisoned all throughout the United States as not just a problem that need to be dealt with, but a crisis, a situation that bordered on fascism. Well, fast forward 30, 40 years until the present, there are more than 300,000 prisoners in California alone, one state out of 50. The imprisonment in California, notice I'm not talking about the United States, but in California alone, exceeds that of France, of Belgium, of England, and perhaps I could name 4 or 5 other countries combined. So we could not perceive back then of what it would become, and so it's monstrous when you really look at what's happening today. You can literally talk about millions of people being part, that is, incarcerated by the prison industrial complex today, men, women, and children. And that level of mass incarceration, really mass repression, has to have an immense impact and effect on the outer community, not just among families, but in a social and communal consciousness way, and the inculcation of fear among generations. So it's at a level and at a depth that many of us could not even fathom or dream of today.
I can't help but wonder, you talk about so many important social and economic issues in your work. Do you have a dream today if you could see one of those aspects changed? Which one would you pick? What do you wish you could see happen in the United States?
There's never one thing. I mean, it's a sexy question, and I understand it, and I will address it. But the point is, because the system is a system of interconnectedness, and because one part of the system impacts another part of the system, and because what Antonio Gramsci called hegemony of the ideological system impacts other parts of the system, you can't change one thing that'll impact all things. I think, if anything, that's one of the lessons of the 1960s, because the civil rights movement was talking about, say, integration, this and that, and changing the schools. In point of fact, if you look at the vast majority of working class and poor black kids in American schools today, they live and spend their hours and their days in a system profoundly as segregated as that of their grandparents. But it's not segregated by race, it's segregated by race and class. Formerly class, which impacts race. The great Jonathan Kozol, who has researched American education for 40 years, has written in one of his most recent books that the American educational system is an apartheid system. I know from my personal interaction with my own family, talking to my wife and my kids and even the grandkids, that the schools that my grandchildren go to are worse than the schools I went to when I was in my minor years and in my teenage years. That's a condemnation of a system. But because former generations only concentrated on one thing or one side of the problem, the problems really got worse and worse and worse. And while there's a lot of rhetoric about schools, American schools are a tragedy. That's the only thing they can be called. Well, I would rephrase that. American schools in many of the black and Latino communities are not a tragedy. They are a crime.
You were monitored by the FBI at the age of 14, and I want to ask you, now with laws such as the NDAA being passed in the United States, where people are watched, detained, and can be held, that's become easier than ever. Do you think Big Brother has officially shown his face in this country at this point?
Well, let's look at it this way. If you look back at the COINTELPRO era, in those files, of not just me, but hundreds of thousands of people who were active in the Black Liberation Movement, in the Women's Liberation Movement, in the anti-war movement, even in the Animal Liberation Movement, all these movements that we're supposedly have the constitutional right to participate in. What is clear is that the FBI and their leaders and their agents knew that everything they did then was illegal. And FBI agents were taught and trained how to break into places, how to do what they call black bag jobs and that kind of stuff, how to commit crimes. But this is what they were also told. You better do it, and you better not get caught, because if you get caught, you're going to jail, and we'll act like we don't know you. You're on your own. What has happened in the last 20 and 30 years? Well, not just the NDAA, but the so-called Patriot Act has made everything that was illegal back in the 1960s and 1950s and 1970s, they've legalized it. They've legalized it. They've legalized the very things that FBI agents and administrators knew was criminal back then. That means they can look in your mail, they certainly can read your email, they tap your phones, they do all of that. But they do it in the name of national security. But they do it nonetheless. What we live in today is a national security state where Big Brother is legalized, rationalized.
You've described politicians once as prostitutes in suits, giving your apologies to honest prostitutes. So I want to ask you, it's election season in the United States right now. Who do people trust? Who would you vote for?
Nobody, frankly. I mean, let me put it this way. I have seen no one that I could, in good conscience, vote for today. Because most of the people that are out there are the two major political parties, and when they talk, you know, all I hear is a kind of madness, an unreasonableness, a wish to return to days of yore, the 1950s. Or they talk about the perpetuation of the American empire, imperialism. My God, I mean, what is there to vote for? How many people consciously, when they go to the polls, are voting for imperialism, or voting for more war, or voting for their son?
This call is from the State Correctional Institution at Mahanoy and is subject to monitoring and recording.
Son or daughter or father or mother, for that matter, to become a member of the armed forces and become a mass murderer.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
A bomber.
Sir, can I just ask you very quickly, since we have 60 seconds, I just want to ask you lastly, you seem to have endorsed the Occupy Wall Street movement that has sprung up all over the United States this year.
Right.
Is this the type of uprising that you think could change America and do good for the United States?
I think it's the beginning of the kind of uprising, because it has to be deeper, it has to be broader, it has to address issues that are touching on the lives of poor and working class people. I think it has a ways to go to make that.
30 seconds remaining.
But I think it's a damn good beginning. I just wish it was bigger and angrier.
Since our time is running out, Mumia, can I ask you, you're the voice of the voiceless. What is your message to your supporters today, right now, who are listening to you?
In the words of Kwame Ture, organize, organize, organize.
Because it was no secret that Death Row Records was involved in drug trafficking.
Between 30 and 40 police officers, some of whom are seen here, worked off duty for Death Row. Suge Knight had a lot of power, even within the DA's office.
Tupac's relatives, his mom, his half-brother, Mopreme, what have they had to say about, you know, I know that they've said, at least Mopreme has said some things. What have they been officially on the record, off the record? What do they say about the murder? What do they think right now?
Well, Watani Tayahimba was a longtime friend of Afeni Shakur. He was a Los Angeles Black Panther. He was Tupac's business manager, and he was a national security director of the New African People's Organization, which Tupac was part of for many years. And so he says that Afeni has stopped getting political about all this because she's scared, rightfully scared. I mean, she's lived her life under U.S. intelligence watch, U.S. intelligence harassment. U.S. intelligence tried to arrest her. They did obviously arrest her, and they put her in jail for years, and they tried to put her in jail for the rest of her life. So she's keeping away from the radical political side of it all, except she did back Cynthia McKinney when Cynthia McKinney put a bill through Congress to say we want all of Tupac's government documents. And it was modeled after the JFK bill to get all the JFK documents. And because Cynthia McKinney knew there was an incredible amount of documents on Tupac. And so she did a press conference with Cynthia McKinney to get all the government documents. Now, of course, the Justice Department told me that there's over 4,000 pages in Tupac's FBI file. They weren't supposed to tell me that, but someone slipped with that, and I think it was because she liked Tupac. And so I paid for over 4,000 pages to be copied and sent to me, and they only sent me 99, and they said for national security reasons they weren't giving me the rest, the other 3,900 pages. But so that's where Fanny is when she's, she does some things, but she tries to stay a little away from it all. She told me, that she really wants to know how much she, is thankful for what I'm doing, but she just has to keep a distance so she doesn't get attacked. But Watani Tayahimba, of course, gave me loads of interviews and is very supportive. Merpreem Harding, he calls himself Merpreem Shakur now. He's Matulu's son and Tupac's stepbrother. He said on an interview with me just a few weeks ago that Tupac was a revolutionary, and that's why they killed him. So he's in agreement with the general theory of my book. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another interview on YouTube I saw too where he directly says he thinks it was cops, and they said, "Do you want to get more specific than that? Do you have any proof?" And he said, "If I did, and I was speaking about it, I'd be in jail." And he just left it at that. I mean, that is it's pretty definitive,
Right.
From his stepbrother. That's
and he would have been incredibly influential and powerful. And for someone who's such a committed leftist activist to be that powerful, that for the powers that be, it would have been dangerous because he would have committed his influence, his money, and everything else to making the society better. To me, for the 99%.
Yeah.
Against all odds, says Haitian Jack and James and Jimmy Henchman knew you were working for the Feds, meaning the Federal Bureau of Investigation, when you set me up and wet me up, meaning she had me shot. So then, obviously, his last album got political again.